Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be checking out Nobody Wants to Have Kids Anymore by How Money Works. Yes guys, for a lot of you guys that are newer to the channel and just only watch the Warhammer content, this was actually the channel that I reacted to first on my channel. It wasn't a very well done video, I'll be honest. I didn't have my background as I do now. It was the very first reaction content I had ever made on the channel was on How Money Works. So I figure it's been months since we've checked that out. Why not go back, check out some more of his content? I really like his takes that he has in his videos. I think they're fantastic. I don't agree with everything he says always, but you know, that's fine. I don't think you need to, and to still have a good opinion, you know what I'm saying? And I really appreciate the opinion he has, you know, and it opens your mind a little bit too, you know, gets you thinking about stuff. Obviously not Warhammer related, not my usual content, but I do like doing videos on topics that interest me, and this does interest me. Societal issues in general do interest me. So does Warhammer, of course, but it's good to change it up a little bit. So I figure let's check out this video here today. Nobody wants to have kids anymore. Why does nobody want to have kids anymore? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons for it. Obviously, the state of the economy is in most places nowadays. Most people can barely afford themselves, let alone, you know, another human in their life. So I feel like that's a big part of it. But I feel like a lot of times when people have kids nowadays too, I feel like they're not necessarily ready for them. You know what I mean? I see a lot of the times, you know, people having kids in a relationship where there should not be a kid in the relationship. You know what I'm saying? And then, you know, that relationship usually doesn't last, and now it's, you know, single parenthood usually for the most part. It's unfortunate, but I find that to be the reality of a lot of people my age nowadays, unfortunately. It's not to say it's like a for sure thing that's going to happen, but it's just something I've noticed quite a bit. So, but yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting video. Again, How Money Works. Really excited to check this out. So yeah, guys, of course, leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe for more content from me, leave your recommendations down in the comments below, come join our Discord, and of course, big thank you to all of our members. I appreciate you guys inspire me to make more content for you guys every single day. And with that, let's get right into this video, guys.
The end of the Second World War resulted in a massive spike in fertility across the world that gave rise to the largest generation in history. The
baby boomers.
Baby boomers.
Yeah.
Soldiers returned home young, dumb, and full of patriotic spirit.
True.
Especially here in America, this family-centered growth coincided with what many believed to be the golden age of capitalism. Homes were cheap, the free market was providing newfangled products to consume, jobs could provide a stable and comfortable living, and the only thing left to do was get busy starting a family. Now,
literally,
this sounds like such a rose-tinted version of history that borders on being inaccurate, but that doesn't actually matter. Today,
like, yes and no. Like, again, people had to work for what they had, especially like after World War II. It depends what nation you were in with the rebuild phase. If you're in a European country, if you're in America, you're coming back, and man, like, women don't have to work in the factory anymore. Women can return to home. You have a job basically guaranteed as a man at that time. You know, there's plenty of you know, single people out there of young age that are, you know, looking to start families, looking to meet people. Yeah, it's a very optimistic time in history for sure. The 40s, late 40s, early 50s, at least in Western culture for sure. Media at the time booming, you know, cinema, music, all that stuff, just fucking fantastic at the time period. Yeah, you know, it was honestly, looking back on it, seems like a great time period, but you did have to work for it. You know, it wasn't all, you know, sunshine and rainbows. People did work back then. People put in the time, but also everything was so much cheaper. Inflation was not the problem that it is today. Your money in general got you a lot further, even though you got paid a lot less of it, if that makes sense.
Tinted version of history that borders on being inaccurate, but that doesn't actually matter. Today, we are dealing with expensive homes, overconsumption of disposable consumer junk, and jobs that are extremely insecure. So naturally, the most pressing question for governments around the world is how to make people make babies again?
Childcare is now more expensive than rent for working families and is costing the economy more than $122 billion a year.
Their childcare expenses from their income taxes. That's a first.
What is the biggest thing that needs to change here in South Korea to make?
Yeah, and I was literally about to mention that right then and there. Eastern countries, a lot of Eastern countries, unfortunately, South Korea, perfect example. China, what they did there, perfect example. Japan, perfect example. A lot of these countries, unfortunately, I don't want to say like Japan is like the prime example of antisocial behavior, but a lot of people in Japan are very antisocial. It's just kind of how society has evolved there over time. I feel like South Korea is the same way a lot of the times. That's not to say anything about people living there. It's not to say everybody living there is like that, of course, but this is just from what I hear, just my interpretations as a Canadian, right? So they're probably misinformed, obviously. Like I don't live there, right? Unfortunately, I've never had the pleasure to visit there. It's very expensive to visit there. I'd love to go to Japan one day. But it's very expensive to visit. But this is just from what our insight, I guess, here. South Korea too, yeah, like your birth rate has plummeted. A lot of people aren't having kids. A lot of young people aren't engaging in relationships with people, from how I understand it. And in Japan, that's a big one too. A lot of people aren't looking for relationships, men or women. It's just not. And I think Canada too, it's a lot of the Western world too. It's becoming the same syndrome. As if it's just like, you know, people, it's hookup culture in a sense, at least in the Western world. It's like you have so many options that it's like nobody ever wants to settle down with somebody. And when they do, that person's usually not the right one, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's just like people treat each other as if they're disposable. It's a really bad attitude, what like dating apps and all that shit, what it's done to the dating scene and like people getting together in general. It's very awful. It has not promoted anything good, in my opinion.
Change here in South Korea to make this more appealing for women.
Starting next year, South Korea will pay a child care allowance of around $530 to parents with newborns.
The biggest issue in 20 years will be population collapse.
Yes.
Not explosion, collapse.
And I think Elon, sorry to blab here again, this is the type of video I like to blab on. I think Elon Musk with that one is correct. There's been this statement of world overpopulation, right? And it's just kind of false in a sense, you know. If you're talking about fertile land, where there is fertile land, especially if you're talking about farming in what's the word, renewable ways, you know, if you're not trashing the land around you with the practices of your agriculture, there's enough potential growing room, enough potential food on the planet. We could sustain a lot of people, a lot more people than we have now. The idea of overpopulation, I've never really bought into it personally. But yeah, when you see countries where it's like China, for example, perfect example, they enacted a one-child policy now. Their entire culture is afraid to have children. They don't want to have children even. But even so, with one child, like your population just aged out. And now you have a generation that has to take care of the older generation. And there's not any younger generation coming in to do the same. It's not sustainable in any sense. I don't understand countries that are pushing that. You should be pushing people to come together to grow families, you know, to actually work towards something real rather than, you know, pushing it away, claiming that the world is overpopulated. The world isn't a great place, but overpopulation, I don't think, is one of the reasons because of that. Like, I don't think it has anything to do with it, you know? That's just my opinion.
Population collapse. Not explosion, collapse.
An uncontrolled population decline is a very concerning issue that will have serious impacts on all of us who are planning to live for more than the next 20 years.
Yes.
But it's important to distinguish between people who are concerned about what a population decline represents and people who are concerned about not having a ready stream of available labor produced for them. They may sound similar, but there are two very distinct solutions depending on how you look at the problem or if you even consider it a problem at all. To see why, we need to clear up some history. The exact cause of the 1950s baby boom was not as simple as people just returning home from war and getting to it. The easiest way to see this is that there was no baby boom after the First World War.
Yeah.
In fact, after 1918 and a brief dip during the Spanish flu, birth rates dropped to levels very similar to today. Now, the reason for that, though, in the 20s is because of the Depression. Like, it's kind of the same problem we're having now where, you know, your money was worthless. Nobody could get a job. People were just poor in general. The only people really having kids were rural farmers, right? And you had a lot of kids. You had like
7 or 8 kids usually, you know, because that's, you know, that's labor for your farm in a sense, right? That's typically why they did it, right? But yeah, no, the Great Depression totally affected things. It's much the same as it is now. And you can see in this chart too, the like complete drop off, right, of births and the fertility rate right around the 70s. It's kind of nuts to see. I wonder why that is, eh? And the fertility rate is like basically been stagnant. Birth rates kind of climbed back up there, but now it's back on the decrease, yeah.
Kind of goes against the narrative. If you paid any attention to general media coverage of population collapse, you have probably been told that this is an entirely modern phenomenon caused by, well, whatever problem with the modern world you want to pick. But that's not entirely accurate. In fact, the fertility rate back here was actually worse than it looks. To understand why, you need to understand 2 numbers. The fertility rate, normally expressed in the number of births per woman,
right,
and also the replacement rate. The replacement rate is how many children the average woman needs to have to maintain the population. Today in America and most other high-income countries, that number is about 2.1 children per woman. The 2 is because the population is naturally split 50-50 between men and women. So to account for that, the average woman needs to have 2 children. And
right.
The 0.1 is because tragically, some children don't make it to adulthood where they could potentially have children of their own.
Right.
Now, everybody from politicians across the political spectrum to your weird uncle at Thanksgiving has been paying strangely close attention to national and global fertility rates. But what gets less attention is that the replacement rate is variable too, and it has also been declining. Back in the 1920s, people needed to have more than 3 children on average just to maintain the population. So the infant mortality rate was much higher than it is today.
Much higher, unfortunately, and again, also the labor, right? Like, the problem is like the technology just wasn't the same, so you needed a lot more people to get anything done, right? Which is an interesting, I think, key part of it. But yeah, not having access to modern medicine too, absolutely. Like, not only did that, unfortunately, was that the demise of many children, but the demise of many mothers too. A lot of pregnancies ended in death, unfortunately, just because of, you know, the medical practices of the time or the lack thereof, medical technology, medication to actually see it through, you know. It was a very dangerous thing.
The population back here was actually declining faster than it is today. All in the age before modern contraceptives, widespread women in the workforce, the breakdown of family values, or whatever else is blamed for our current population trends. The other explanation for the baby boom was that the post-World War II economy was just so good that starting a family was easy. But the Roaring '20s were also a highly prosperous post-war economy, and yet people were having a lot fewer babies. The birth rate actually only started recovering after 1929, when the Great Depression plunged a staggering amount of American families back into relative poverty. In fact, by actually looking at the data, you can see that the baby boom really started in the 1930s, when the American economy was arguably in its worst state in the last century. There was a pause during the war, but the post-war baby boom that we are all familiar with was really just the continuation of a trend that had already started. So if it wasn't contraceptives, women in the workforce, economic growth, the move into cities, or modern family values, what actually caused the birth rate slump back then? Well, it's the same thing that caused the baby boom. And the reason I'm giving you this history lesson is because it could also solve a lot of our population problems today, but you might not like the answer. One of the most consistent baby blockers is income inequality.
Right.
The economist Thomas Piketty, as part of writing his book Capital in the 21st Century, collected and compiled income inequality data over the last century. Just quickly, this is probably one of the best books on economics ever written.
So, Capital by Thomas Piketty, I've never read it. If anybody has read it, let me know what you think about it. Again, I really like how manyworks takes on this. He goes pretty in depth on this stuff, and he breaks it down. And again, I don't always agree with him, but he seems to be making sense so far. I'm picking up with this so far.
Century. Just quickly, this is probably one of the best books on economics ever written, and it reads easily even to non-economists. So, like always, I will leave a link to it in the description below. Using my link helps the channel a little bit, and a good book will provide way more value than I ever could through something like a Patreon.
Go use his link if you want to pick up that book.
If you invert the data that Piketty collected on income inequality, it lines up almost perfectly with the fertility rate. if people feel like they aren't falling behind, if they have social mobility, and they can provide what is considered a good life, they will have more children. The New Deal that was the foundation of the Great Depression recovery efforts and the GI Bill following World War II massively reduced income inequality, and with it, the babies flowed. But this is a big problem because, yes, people in power want to avoid a population crunch, but not like that. So it's time to learn how money works to find out how to make people make babies without, giving them too much.
Right.
This week's video is sponsored by Beam. Beam is all about helping you sleep better, feel better, and perform at your best with high-quality wellness products. Their best-selling Dream Powder is a nighttime blend designed to help you fall asleep faster and wake up refreshed. It's crafted with natural ingredients like melatonin, magnesium, and L-theanine to support deep, restful sleep.
Damn,
and here's the best
I could
part.
use that.
In a customer survey, 92% of people who used the Dream Powder said it helped them get higher quality sleep. The ingredients themselves are backed by clinical research for their potential benefits in promoting restful sleep.
Well,
I've been
goddamn.
using it for a couple weeks now before bed, and it's
Really?
made going to sleep a lot easier. I fall asleep instead of spending hours on Reddit, and I wake up the next morning feeling refreshed.
That sounds about
Plus,
right.
It tastes like a delicious cup of hot cocoa, so it actually feels like a treat before bed.
Really?
I personally like the chocolate peanut butter flavor, and it comes with 30 servings. So it works.
Chocolate peanut butter, I'm a little slut for, I'll be honest.
Subscribe and save. Not bad. And if you want to try it out, you can use my code for up to 35% off. That's
Go use code, set the tone. I guess he has a barcode there. Go enter his code, 35% off. That's a pretty good fucking deal if you guys are having sleep troubles. Might actually look into that. That sounds pretty good, actually.
35% off subscriptions and 18% off one-time purchases.
35% off is a pretty substantial amount off.
Check it out. For most of human history, our population has been pretty much stagnant.
Right.
Based on archaeological records, the average population
Yeah, it doesn't move, and then it does.
Between the dawn of human civilization and the Industrial Revolution was just
Boom.
0.04%.
Yeah.
Generation to generation,
Wow.
it was barely enough to register.
600 million is
There
crazy.
were significant setbacks like the Black Plague, which wiped out between a quarter and half of all people in Europe.
Yeah.
People had a lot more children on average, but fewer of them survived, so the population didn't really budge. And then came the Industrial Revolution, which kicked off a bit of a feedback loop. Mechanized industry and agriculture could feed and provide more people, and more people meant more work could be done, and more innovations could be made to feed
Look
and
at that
provide for
graph.
more people. Refinements in medicine and nutrition meant that people also lived a lot longer, which gave them more opportunities to apply their expertise to making an overall wealthier world. By best estimates, something like 7% of all of the humans to have ever lived are currently alive right now, and that's been great for business. Having more people naturally boosted industry, because there were more potential consumers to cater to, and population growth provided a ready supply of labor to work in the new factories. Early industrial centers like London became extremely rich, but even back then, some familiar trends emerged. Cities during the Industrial Revolution were horrible places to live.
Yeah.
They figured out building factories much faster than building sanitation. So infectious diseases, malnutrition, and foodborne pathogens were more prevalent in these population-dense centers. So many people died in London that up until the 20th century, it was almost entirely reliant on people moving from the countryside to get work to maintain its population.
Wow.
Now, most cities in high-income countries
So I knew it was bad in London, but I never realized it was that bad. Like it was entirely reliant on new people moving from the country into the cities purely to just keep its labor up. I didn't realize that. I thought during the Industrial Revolution, even back then, I thought immigration was quite a big thing in England. Maybe it was, but that still just wasn't enough. But goddamn, wow, like that sounds very unsustainable. Wow.
The countryside to get work to maintain its population. Now, most cities in high-income countries, with the notable exception of San Francisco, eventually figured out that leaving human waste in the street was not a good idea. So even though cities aren't actively killing their inhabitants anymore, they are still population black holes that have very low birth rates and rely on people moving to them to maintain themselves. That's simply because cities are expensive. Unless you are extremely wealthy, you probably can't afford a family-sized home close to a major city.
Hell no.
And depending on your career, you might not be able to move away from those cities without losing your job. Today,
that's also true.
Emerged where having lots of children is either an indication of being extremely wealthy or being extremely poor, with very little room in the middle for large middle-class families, because that's just become unaffordable in most cities.
But I think that's also because, like, largely too, like the middle class over the last decade or so has decreased so much. Like it's a lot of people aren't middle class anymore. You're either majority poor or you're upper class. You know what I mean? Like there's like the middle income is middle income class. It's basically been demolished over the past decade or so, I want to say. It still exists for sure, but it's definitely not what it was. That's for sure.
Room in the middle for large middle class families, because that's just become unaffordable in most
At least here in
cities around
Canada.
the world. Now, over the past 300 years, we have also run out of people to pull from the high birth rate countryside. So the trend has gone global, and today, most advanced economies pull in people from high birth rate countries.
Yeah.
The rise in immigration to fill labor shortages has masked the issue, but it has caused other problems like further contributing to housing affordability and putting downward pressure on wages and upward pressure on income inequality. There is also the not-so-subtle reality that a lot of the people that want a stable supply of young workers would, let's just say, strongly prefer if those workers were homegrown. Now, in all of this, there is one other simple solution.
That's not incorrect, yeah.
Let people work jobs outside of the city. The COVID pandemic was the most recent global event to shake up birth rates. Initially, it caused a sharp dip as people lost their jobs and saw hospitals barely having the capacity to manage the load. But as more dual-income households moved to working from home, births increased and not only made up for the initial drop, but exceeded expected trends. Unsurprisingly, it's easier to deal with a pregnancy and have children when parents don't need to go into an office. It allows people to live in cheaper...
Now, to his point though, too, like, you also have to remember what's been going on at the same time that this birth rate has spiked at, right? Mass immigration to most of the Western countries, right? That's Canada and the US. So when you're talking about your country's population is increasing by, you know, millions over the course of a couple of years, you know, and these people are coming with kids. They might be coming pregnant already. They might have kids while they're there, you know, but they're not citizens of the country. So I'm curious to see if that's also taken into account with this, because if it is, then that absolutely explains why the birth rates have increased. Because again, a lot of people I know here in Canada, it's like a lot of people are having babies because it's an accident, and you know, you don't want the alternative, which is fair. That's absolutely fair. Or, you know, you have money, right? Like that's the thing. But a lot of people don't have money. Like most people I know that are Canadian citizens, they're not going out of their way to just have kids anymore. It's not something that most people are even thinking about because it's just not affordable to do so, you know? Versus people that come here and then want to get citizenship for their family or for, you know, whatever else, then that might explain the increased birth rate. That's all I'm saying, right? I'm just looking at it from that perspective.
And have children when parents don't need to go into an office. It allows people to live in cheaper and more family-friendly communities further away from commercial centers. Now, this reality is wrestling some jimmies because companies want people to move back into the office for a variety of reasons. But the good news is that we actually have some power over this. Even with extreme measures, it's very hard to force people to have children. So if businesses won't entertain policies to promote equality or let people work from home, they don't get their future workers and consumers. If you want further evidence of the benefits of moving away from the office, look no further than the CEOs themselves that are demanding that workers return to the office while they don't actually show up to work at all. Go and watch this video on how they are making that work for them, because it's something more relevant today than when the video was made last year.
Wow.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep on learning how money works.
Well, guys, that was Nobody Wants to Have Kids Anymore by How Money Works. I thought that was an awesome video. As always, I really like his takes. I really like his explanations. That's not to say I agree with everything that he says necessarily, but I do really enjoy his takes on these societal issues and economic issues that we're having nowadays. I know this isn't the regular type of content I make. It's not Warhammer related. It's real life related. But again, I do find these concepts and these topics interesting. And if I find it interesting, I'm going to make a video on it, unfortunately. So yeah, guys, hopefully some of you guys enjoyed this. If you did, leave a like, subscribe for more content from me, and of course, leave your recommendations down in the comments below. Come join our Discord, guys. I love seeing you guys there. I love interacting with you guys on that level, of course. So come on down, join our Discord, and join our Legion today. Yeah, guys. And of course, big shout out to all of our members. I appreciate you guys, all the Hastati out there. You guys inspire me to make more content for you guys every single day. And so with that, guys, this has been Centurion, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace, guys.